Well, good evening, friends, and we are coming to you from the building formerly known as the Downtown Labor Temple and what will be known as the home of Downtown Cornerstone Church. And I couldn't be more excited to be gathered with you tonight just to consider what God has done among us and what He might very well do among us. Tonight is all about taking an opportunity to reflect on and rejoice in Jesus' kindness to us, particularly in the provision of this new building, which we are praying will become a gospel outpost in this city for decades and, Lord willing, generations to come. Now, I don't plan on repeating anything that has already been put out in our onward materials or our initial video tonight. Instead, I want to take this opportunity to remind us why we are here in this city at this particular moment in our generation. And then we will take time following that to pray, to thank God for loving us, for being faithful to us, for providing for us every step along the way, and also asking Him to continue to do above and beyond all that we ask, think, or imagine. So here's how we describe our purpose as a church. If you've been around, you know this. The way we sum up God's purpose for the local church is this: we exist to know Jesus and to make Him known for the glory of God and the joy of all people. That's why we are in this city. For this to become a reality, not only across the street, but around the world. Not only from the avenues, but to the alleyways. Not just among our neighborhoods, but also the nations. Now, I know that many of you are not from Seattle, but I am. I was actually born here at Northwest Hospital up by Northgate Mall. I met Jesus at the University of Washington. I met Jen at the University of Washington. We have lived in the U District and Green Lake and Magnolia and Shoreline and West Seattle and for the last decade in downtown. And I hope that I get to spend my whole life preaching the gospel to this great city that I love, but also breaks my heart. Toward the end of my time at the University of Washington, I got a job as a tour guide at the Space Needle. Some of you have heard this story before. And it was during that summer that I fell in love with this city in new and deeper ways. My job was literally to brag on the city at 520 feet above the ground on the observation deck all summer long to the throngs of tourists that were coming to visit our city. Now, one of the elevators that shipped staff and supplies up and down faced the downtown corridor. And every now and then I would find myself in that elevator by myself from the basement staff entrance all the way up to the top where it dropped me off at the observation deck. And when I found myself in the staff and supplies elevator, I would often get on my knees on that metal floor and just raise out my hands over the city and ask God to do something unique here, something that this city hasn't seen yet. Asking God to bring revival here, for His Spirit to course through the avenues and alleyways, for faithful churches to be planted in every one of Seattle's major neighborhoods, and for missionaries to be sent up, and for pastors to be trained and developed, and that I would even get to play a small part in that, even if my name was not known outside of 2 city blocks. That was literally my prayer. And little did I know then, while I was on my knees time and time again on the metal corrugated floor of the staff and supplies elevator, the Space Needle, that 10 years from that point, I, along with a team, would be moving downtown to plant Downtown Cornerstone. It is therefore no accident that we are here tonight. This isn't just a matter of happenstance or accidental circumstances that just mysteriously and magically came together. It is God's doing. It is His design. He wants us in this city. He has brought us to this point. By God's providential design, we are here together as His people so that He would get the glory and our joy would be made full as the gospel rings out and lives are changed. And so one of my hopes tonight is that we all feel the joyful weight of that reality, the joyful privilege of being part of this work that God is forming. It is never business as usual in God's kingdom. Now, most of you are aware of this, even if you're new to town. Seattle continues to need Jesus, arguably more than it ever has. Seattle is a beautiful but broken city. There are about 780,000 people that call the city of Seattle home, about 4 million, 5 million in the larger metro area, and 82,000 live downtown. Almost 20,000 new people have moved downtown since we first started to plant downtown Cornerstone. Now, before the pandemic, half of all the jobs in the city of Seattle were downtown. It has consistently been among the fastest growing cities in the United States, and at the same time, among the least churched. Time and time again, both Washington and Seattle are among the top 3 to 5 least churched, most post-Christian contexts in our entire country. It's not an exaggeration to say our city has never been more secular than it is right now. Roughly 10% of the city, even at this moment, identifies as atheistic, which is among the top percentage, the highest of all metros in the country. It's also sadly known as a church planting graveyard. So the fact that we're still here on the cusp of our 10th birthday is a massive evidence of God's kindness and faithful provision to us. So all this and more is what led us to plant DCC. We began in Pioneer Square, and then we moved to AMC Theater at Pacific Place, where we worshiped in 5 different theaters over the course of 3 years. Then by God's grace, we were able to secure a lease in our current building where we've been for about 6 years. But all along, we prayed that the Lord would provide a permanent home for us, a permanent gospel outpost where we wouldn't have to worry about when our next lease was due, a permanent place where we could plant deep roots in this city so we could take our attention off where we would next gather and put them more on discipleship and worship and mission and evangelism and church planting. And it seemed possible from beginning to end because it was impossible. I mean, after all, how would we compete against Fortune 500 companies and tech titans and seasoned developers? The reality is, left to ourselves, we couldn't. We knew that the Lord would have to show up, but we knew that we also were not left to ourselves. Our faithful God is with us, and He is going before us and has given us this new building. A permanent place that we will be able to gather in without worrying about when our next lease is due. A permanent base to show our commitment to this city. Even as others leave, we are planting deep roots here. A permanent home for disciple making and counseling and training and classes and raising up the next generation of little ones to proclaim His name amongst the avenues and alleyways of this city as we seek to serve this city. And we also hope that this will become a regional training, equipping, encouraging center for other like-minded churches that are in the Northwest. Now, some of you have asked, it's true that there are potential disadvantages to having a building. There's no doubt about that. A church's identity can shift because it can think it arrived. Expectations can become different. Culture can change as a result. Money and energy can transition to the building and away from worship and making disciples and evangelism and sending. We're completely aware of all of those potential dangers. In fact, we've faced those dangers every step along the way in planting this church. But we believe the potential for fruit far outweighs, is far greater than any potential risk that we are taking in moving into this building. Provided we stay true to our purpose, the Lord will continue to go before us. In fact, that we've been given this building is evidence of that. This building is just a tool. It's not an end. It is a means to the great end of making much of Jesus in His all-sufficiency while we still have breath in our lungs. It's just simply a stage on which God is unfolding His glory, one changed life to the next, as Kelly put it so well at the beginning. It's just a tool. It's just a stage. Now, of course, all of this is happening amidst an incredibly challenging time. It's not an exaggeration. This is probably the most challenging time that our generation has faced. And we all feel this. The pandemic is preventing us from freely gathering. It's highlighting our differences and it's accentuating our divisions. There's political turmoil, there's racial tension. People are moving because they can work remotely. We get tired of saying goodbye. Some of us are facing unemployment. As I mentioned this morning, our giving is suffering. I mean, honestly, in some ways, we've never been, humanly speaking, more vulnerable as a church. And that's saying a lot. We've been vulnerable a lot along the way. But here's the Lord's word to us. All of this is to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. This is how Jesus' church has advanced from the very beginning. Jesus specializes in advancing his church through turmoil and tumult, not through seasons of bliss. Jesus' local church has survived and thrived amidst the rise and fall of countless generations of empires, plagues, political intrigue, martyrdom, persecution, division, famine, imprisonments, world wars, materialism, idolatry, moral failures, and false teachers, sometimes, often, all at the very same time. And yet here we are 2,000 years later, and it's easy for us to take that for granted. But Christianity has become the largest movement in the history of the world. Jesus' church is resilient. And even we as a church are experiencing something of that resiliency in this season. And yet even so, Jesus' work is not done. We know that. Most people in our city do not know a single Christian that they love and respect and can imagine being like if they just got over that Jesus thing. Not a single one. Many nominal Christians have never experienced what it means to taste and see that the Lord is good. Many Christians who are mere infants in their faith have never been discipled. There are many dead and dying churches who have abandoned faithfulness and yet lack solid, Bible-centered, gospel-savvy pastors to revitalize them. There are thousands of unreached people groups, people who have never heard the name of Jesus amongst the nations of the world. There is still much work to be done, and that is why we are here together. This is the unfolding story that we are all a part of. This is not our story. This is his story. He is inviting us into. And Jesus is now including this building with a slight just smell to it into his next chapter of his story that he is writing through us. It's almost like he's turning the page, next chapter, let me insert the labor temple here, and let me continue writing the story that I'm writing through downtown Cornerstone. Jesus is doing that. And it's no accident that this building is in the shadow of the Space Needle, and we can see the staff and supplies elevator where I prayed that prayer over and over again on my knees 20 years ago. Do you think that's a surprise? Could we write that story? There's no way we could write that story. That's Jesus' story. So we are all a part of this, and in many ways, the Lord is just starting his work. So I know some of you are brand new, and you're like, oh man, like those sound like the good old days. Those were not the good old days. Those were terrifying days, just like these days are terrifying days. Join us as we trust the Lord together. It is not too late to jump in. The Lord does not want us merely relying on past successes, but leaning forward in faith, hope, and love as we ask him to do what only he can do. And this is one reason, by the way, that we constantly face challenges, unique situations that we don't know what to do in over and over again. It's so that our eyes continue to remain fixed on him, and our hope and faith is in him showing up, not merely our ingenuity and control of situations. I mean, think about it. What might he do in the next 10 years or 20 years, 50 years, 100 years? What if he's using us as a foundation for a massive revival that is to come? And he's using our simple faithfulness to bring that about. What might he do next? Don't you want to find out? That's what tonight's all about. Will you join us as we lean into this next chapter that the Lord is writing in and through us? Maybe tonight, will you recommit your life not only to Jesus, but the local expression of his people seen through downtown Cornerstone? Will you maybe even consider staying in Seattle longer than you anticipated for the sake of the gospel here? And maybe avoid COVID movers remorse in the years to come? Do you see how your story only makes sense when it's hitched to the greater story of Jesus alongside his people who are trusting him with you? What might happen if together we committed our days and dollars so the glory of Jesus would be known in this city? So just to be clear, this is not about DCC. This is not about hype. You guys know I can't stand hype. It is about the incomparable worth of Jesus. That's what it's about, which is the only thing that will empower this specific gospel work for decades, if not generations to come. Attractional ministry won't do it. Fog machines won't do it. Fancy bands won't do it. The incomparable worth of Jesus that resonates so deeply in the human soul will do it. That's why we're here tonight. That's what we're about as his people. Taste and see that the Lord is good, and invite everyone who will hear, who has ears to hear, to taste and see what we've tasted and seen.